So the 65 game rule this season has been quite interesting because it's tied into multiple things, multiple rules, multiple structures, particularly the way the Players Association is even organized. And also the owners very cleverly tied this rule into a team rule, which is enforcing the superstars to play on nationally televised games. If they don't, teams could be looking at fines. That's a whole separate rule, but at the same time it ties in. So there's multiple layers to this, and we're seeing players beginning to show frustrations about it, particularly the superstars, as they're going to be most affected, but they only really represent 1% of the whole player pool. And again, this whole situation is multi-layered, and this is by design because these billionaire owners have just multiple organization of lawyers that have years and years of understanding contract language and how to tie things together in order to get out of certain circumstances. Because even though the 65 game rule only affects 1% of the players, who are the ones that normally qualify for all NBA teams, thus getting the Supermax contracts, who in a way receive the bulk of the revenue in that 50-50 split, which nowadays, the way the owners actually organized it with the league, I believe the players have 1 or 2 percentage points higher than the owners do on that revenue split. Because even though the NBA players with the new CBA take a higher percentage of the revenue, are now going to have to overcome that 65 game rule. That's just one layer to it. And the first complainers, of course, are going to be that 1%. Guys like Tyrese Haliburton calling it a stupid rule. Jokic saying that, hey, you shouldn't force guys to play if they're injured. Jaylen Brown speaking on how he wants to see the rule lowered to about 58 games. And it even went as far as Stephen Curry saying that the rule should only be tied to the MVP award, not the All-NBA award, which affects players' money. So the group that I like to call the 1%ers of the NBA, the guys who are going to get Supermax contracts, they're the first ones to complain. And again, the owners are very crafty in this whole, I would say, contract language. Because now that the league is entering into a new TV deal and their television partners actually coming up to them saying, hey, we need more superstars to be on the floor. It's affecting our ratings. It's affecting the overall product. Can you make this change? The owners now have turned around and instituted a team rule that's somehow tied to players' contracts. And when I say a team rule, I'm talking about the rule where superstar players have to be at the nationally televised games. And that rule, which is outside of the 65 game rule, it's a team rule. And team rules can only be voted by the owners. They do not need to collectively bargain with the Players Association in regards to that. So the league, in a way, if they're smart and they want their superstars playing more games, what they could do now is schedule a nationally televised game on a back-to-back. Thus, if a superstar is close to hitting that 65 game mark, he's gonna play that back-to-back, because now on the nationally televised game on the second leg, he's gonna have to play because now they're gonna find the teams. And this rule at the same time will please their television partners and not make the NBA look like, oh, we're forcing our guys to play more games even though they might be hurt. It's a very crafty way that they're getting around things, especially from a PR standpoint. And that's just one layer to it. And a prime example of this is in the beginning of the season when you've seen James Harden in his last few days in Philly, when they had a nationally televised game in which they had James Harden sitting on the bench. This game was on TNT, and ESPN had actually inquired about a TNT broadcast of why James Harden was sitting on the bench. And they even went as far as to having Woj tweet it out, which we all know that's one of their biggest and most visible NBA analysts. They had him tweet that out, and they also had him tweet out an article that they made just talking about the overall topic. I've never seen one media entity actually vouch for their competitor so much in that circumstance. So that tells you how dire it was for TNT and ESPN to make sure that the superstars are playing in these nationally televised games, especially if the NBA is going to ask them for a ton of money on the next TV deal. So in this one layer of this whole scenario, we have the mega superstars who normally get the max contracts. They're not only going up against the 65 game rule, they're also going up against the nationally televised games that are going to be on ESPN and TNT. They're going up against that rule at the same time while trying to balance and qualify for their supermax contracts. So that's just one dynamic that's playing out with the 65 game rule. But another layer to this is also how the players union is organized, because the way it's always been structured, it's scheduled for a lot of miscommunication. That's why you see the star players now all of a sudden coming out after the new CBA is already signed. Now with the players union, the way it's constructed is that each team has a representative, and just on that base level, this is where things are going to start, looking a little funny in the light. Most teams elect a player representative almost as if it's a burden, like it's almost like a cleanup job, like a janitor job. It's almost like doing laundry. You see some teams elect a player that's super young, or just a player that really has no voice in that locker room. A role player that might be the 13th to 15th guy on the bench. That's their player representative. And it even goes as far as 7 teams having no representatives at all. That's how little they care about it. And all these representatives from each team are supposed to come together and vote for 9 vice presidents, who basically have to come together and then, kind of organize themselves and speak to the other top brass of the Players Association to then communicate to the league. That's where you see vice presidents like CJ McCollum, Grant Williams, Harrison Barnes, Jaylen Brown, Donovan Mitchell. There's 9 of these guys that are supposed to come together, and then that's when they speak to the head of the association, and then that head of the association, or just those group of members, they then bargain with the league. But on a fundamental level, just starting out with their players' representatives, that's where everything begins at. They don't even take that shit serious from team to team. So how are all those representatives supposed to come together, then vote for the vice presidents and make sure that the vice presidents have an understanding of what's going on overall, and then communicate that going forward? And most unions in America kind of set up this way. That's why sometimes you see corruptions within unions. It sort of plays out like that childhood game where everyone gets in a circle and then one person tells someone something in the ear, and by the time it goes around, it comes out completely different, and you don't know who said what, who changed the whole phrase or anything. And the NBA owners, in a way, are directly involved of the players even electing a representative, because with all the obligations the players are going through with their teams, they may have a coach say, oh yeah, you guys, you got to vote a representative, so just choose somebody that's going to be the team representative and blah blah blah. They kind of brush over it because the coach is not even involved in that scenario, or the organization in a way are not supposed to be involved. They sort of remind teams that they got to do that. And it's not like the owner's going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, guys, make time out to speak about what you're going to tell your player rep. So fundamentally, the foundation of the Players Association is already flawed. The onus is really on the players to come together and make sure that they're having meetings, maybe quarterly or weekly or monthly, and actually elect a person who has a voice and respect in the locker room. And for those of you watching the video version of this, here's a list of all the representatives for some of these teams. And as you can see, it tends to be the guys that pretty much don't really have a voice within that locker room. And just even with the team dynamic, they don't really have that much power on the team. There's very few franchises, maybe 1 or 2, actually have a star player who actually represents the team, like the Brooklyn Nets, Mikal Bridges, Tyrese Haliburton and the Pacers, or Jamal Murray and the Denver Nuggets. But for the most part, it's either role players representing these teams, or about 70 of these teams don't even give a fuck enough to even vote a person in to represent the players. So overall, the owners seem like they kind of knocked out a few birds with one stone. I'm not going to say 2 birds with one stone. I'm going to say quite a few. They kind of, from a PR standpoint, made it look good that they give the players a higher bulk of the revenue, while at the same time in the back end, because of the 65 game rule, the players who normally qualify for the Supermax deals now have to fight over that hurdle, as Tyrese Haliburton alone is probably going to be the first victim to fall on this, where he's set up to lose about $41 million. So if the superstar players don't play enough games to actually make all NBA, thus qualifying for Supermax deals, at the end of the day, how much of the revenue is going back towards the players? It's not like the $41 million Tyrese could miss out on is going to go somewhere else, or they're just going to spread it out to the rest of the team. And the next part to it is that they satisfy their TV partners in a way, because the NBA has control of the schedule. So what they can do now is actually schedule star players nationally televised games and make sure that it's the second leg of a back-to-back, because they're going to have the pressure in the first game to try to not miss it so they can hit the threshold of 65 games. And then the team has pressure the next day to play that player in a nationally televised game because they're going to get fined if he sits out. So you start to see on the surface level the way the league makes something look, but on the back end, they're getting their agendas done. And with them setting up a situation where the star players have to play more games, their TV partners end up winning in this whole situation, thus equates to more money for the league, as they're going to possibly get more bidders, or just the current partners, TNT and ESPN, is going to have to fork up more money because the product gets better, as most of the influx of the television money is due to stars. So it is what it is. The league definitely has pressure to make sure star players are playing, because right now they're about to enter into these negotiations and a lot of TV people are spilling out the beans. The timing of just random sources releasing information. You got TV people talking about how the league didn't really care in the beginning phases of their last TV deal about fixing the rest policy when it was brought up to them. But now all of a sudden with that deal expiring, they're so concerned now. So the pressure is definitely on for the league, and this 65 game rule is probably not going to go nowhere as it's set to expire in 2030.